Hello and welcome to this review of my Focus FK-9200. I've had this thing for years and now it's finally time to have a look at it. If you're wondering what's up with the weird keycaps, this is because it's a Portuguese layout and I got it new in box from eBay for as little as €10 back in the day. It came from a very large cache of these things and I think you can still get them on eBay, although they no longer do worldwide delivery. Still, this is an excellent deal. Previously, I've shown a Focus 9000 Key Pro, which was Focus's flagship during the second generation, and this is the keyboard that succeeded it during the third gen, although it's so different from its older brother in almost every way that you'd be forgiven for thinking they weren't even made by the same company. Just like the 9000, it's a so-called Battlecruiser keyboard, which means it's pretty fucking huge, and like most Battlecruisers out there, it incorporates a bunch of extra features. There are other such Battlecruisers out there as well, including the Northgate OmniKey Ultra, Gateway AnyKey, Cherry MX2100 and Autech MCK142 Pro, and all of them are very different, but Focus's Battlecruisers have always been among the more unique and quirkiest of them. I'll be doing some kind of Battlecruiser face-off video at one point where I compare all of them, but that'll be far down the line as I haven't even reviewed all of them yet. Let's start off with the switches, which, like all third-gen boards, are Focus Dome with Slider, which is one of the weirdest dome with slider designs I've encountered so far, and that's saying something. Unlike any other dome with slider switches I've seen, these are actually discrete units, and they can even be taken straight out of the board. They consist of a very strangely shaped slider, a spring, and a pusher, which pushes on the rubber domes below the cutouts in the mounting plate. The design is, in theory, but not execution, very similar to Fujitsu Peerless, and just like Peerless it's clicky, or at least the box says it is, but from what I can tell, the Focus ones really are not. I suspect the spring is there not just for the non-existent clicky noise, but also to allow for overtravel, meaning you shouldn't have to push it down all the way, but in practice I found that the actuation happens so deep down that it handles much the same as other designs anyway. In fact, despite the complexity of the design, the actual key feel isn't among the best I've ever seen. I mean, it's certainly better than an average rubber dome, but definitely not top tier or anything. Although they work fine, and they have a pretty crisp tactility actually, they feel somewhat unnatural, and having to bottom out so obviously really doesn't help them. I ranked it roughly midway in my Dome with Slider mega review, better than shit domes, but worse than any of the good ones, such as NMB, Tulip, Monterey, BTC, and Scorpius. This is in contrast to the FK-9000 and other second or first gen Focus boards, which, with the exception of the occasional seemingly lost Futaba board, almost exclusively came with mechanical Alps switches or Alps clones. Although in terms of key feel, the dome with slider switches are no match for the earlier keyboards, especially those that came with genuine Alps switches, they are quieter. So in an open office environment this might be an advantage, because Alps switches are loud as fuck. Second is the keycaps. Now Focus are well known for using thin Alps mount keycaps like these for the majority of their keyboards, including the 9000. But first of all, the caps on the 9200 aren't Alps mount, they use a bar mount like Alps but it's longer, so you can't stick these on Alps switches, although Alps caps will loosely fit these. Third, older Focuses commonly used thin ABS double shots, but the 9200 has a bunch of caps that look double shot but have no double shot molding marks, and the others do have the double shot molding marks but don't look like they are. These two types are randomly scattered across the board, and to be honest I suspect they're both just silkscreen printed. Fourth, all the Focus boards fairly religiously used colored modifier keys for use with programs like WordPerfect, but the 9200 uses all black lettering and it has no grey caps either, the board is all white. Fifth, it has different features, whereas the 9000 has macro keys, a shortcut card holder, an expanded nav cluster, and most uniquely an integrated calculator, the 9200 has no shortcut card holder or expanded nav cluster, but it does have a trackball near the spacepad here that the 9000 doesn't have, and although it still has macro keys and a calculator, they work completely differently from those on the 9000. For example, the macro keys on the 9000, labeled PF for programmable function, were on the left and could be programmed with up to as few as 14 characters, minus an extra character for every modifier. while on the 9200 they're located above the normal F keys, and they're programmable up to 20 characters, which is a small but significant improvement as it makes a lot more hotkeys feasible. By the way, did I mention that macro keys are fucking awesome? It no longer has a card holder that you can show the shortcuts on, but because it has a bit of a bezel at the top, you can just print a piece of paper and stick it there, which has the added benefit of being close to the actual PF keys, while the 9000's card holder, while very awesome, was rather far away because the keys were located on the left side. I actually still have one of the shortcut cards that I used during my PhD. I used this board a lot at the time. Many shortcuts are for use in Excel, like merge and center, and a few are for ChemDraw, which is a program chemists use to draw structural formulae. The PF12 key isn't marked because that's the one I programmed all my login details into, and I didn't want to advertise that too much to the rest of the world. As for the calculator, it can now show 10 characters on screen rather than 8, and the calculator specific keys are now no longer on the numpad, but they have been jammed into the nav cluster. I'd actually rather still have them on the numpad, to be honest, because they get in the way of the arrow keys, but at least the arrows are in the more traditional inverted T arrangement, rather than the somewhat useless starburst shape they were on in the 9000. To mitigate the issue a bit, I stuck on some standard grey PBT keycaps from an AT101 to help the arrow keys stand out more. These are Alps mount, so they don't stick on perfectly, but it's good enough. I could always use putty if I needed a firmer mount, I guess. The calculator also shows the time when not in use, just like the aftermarket calculator Ben made for my 9000. The calculator that one had originally didn't do that. It's actually amazingly simple to program. You just go to calculator mode, enter the time in hours, minutes, seconds, and then press program send, and it just updates it straight away. So nice and simple. See, and that's one of the things I like about Focus. Sure, their products were made like crap, but the way they operate is just really simple and straightforward, with very little bullshit attached, and I really appreciate that. An absolutely excellent addition to the calculator is this send button here, which outputs the contents of the calculator directly into the computer. So if you do, say, 4 times 5 times 6 equals 120, you can just print it directly into whatever you want. It's great. They also replaced the square root function with a 1 over x1, which I'm very glad about because that's super useful, or at least it is for my types of calculations. Also, the calculator appears to be more robust because even after some good amount of use and several years later, the screen is still working fine and there's no missing or faded digits or anything, while the calc on the 9000 is almost always dead on arrival, even on new old stock specimens, although of course it could be just because this is a much younger board. I suspect it's from 1999 considering the serial number, but it's definitely post 1995, as they also added Windows keys to the keyboard, although the overall layout is still the same, namely what I call the focus layout, with a big ass enter, full size backspace, and split right shift. It is a fair bit shorter than the 9000 though, as they no longer have the macro keys on the side, and even though the macro keys are now at the top, it is no taller to compensate. It still has backup batteries as power, but instead of one of those rechargeable Vata nightmare things, it uses 3 AAA batteries instead, and thankfully they didn't put them in out of the factory, so it's less likely that you'll find one that's been leaking all over the place. As mentioned before, it also comes with a trackball, which is more or less integrated into the spacebar, which has taken on a rather grotesque shape as a result, and it's got 2 mouse buttons below. It works fine, even if the sensitivity is a bit low. I don't know if there's a way to increase sensitivity of one mouse input device over another, but whatever. I have a mouse, so I don't really need it. Speaking of which, the trackball assembly is super flimsy. It's held down with this one plastic ring thing, which looks like it's barely alive to begin with, and the buttons themselves look ragged as fuck and don't even work unless you press them close to the middle. So, one thing that is the same between this one and the 9000 is that they both suffer from Focus's typical mediocre build quality, although, like I said, some of the electronic components seem marginally more reliable. Although it weighs a bit over 1.4 kilograms, which is quite heavy for a membrane keyboard, the case and mounting plate are all plastic, and there is barely a rigid component in the whole keyboard. It's not even level actually, there's something in the way, so I use it with a piece of paper in one of the corners to prop it up. It's fine if you extend the flip out feet though. There was also an issue with the converter I used. Originally I used this Belkin Converter for my old keyboards until I got a Saurus, which I now use for almost everything, but the Belkin had a problem. If you input several characters at once, one or more would sometimes hang. I don't think it had this problem originally, but at some point it got bad enough that I had to abandon using it and switch to my FK-8000, which didn't have macro keys but did have a calculator. However, with the Saurus converter, this issue doesn't happen at all, it works fine, although I guess you can't use the trackball this way. Overall, the features are much better and more well developed than on the 9000, but the switches are considerably worse. Also, it doesn't look anywhere near as good in my opinion. Still, it's a very useful keyboard, very much a workhorse. More useful than the 9000, but not as nice to use if that makes sense. Overall, I'd pick the 9000 any day, and if that's too loud, you can always just linearize it anyway. That's it for this review. Thank you for watching, I hope you enjoyed it. And following is a typing demonstration of me typing on this keyboard.